Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Caregiving Gen X Style. I'm Steve Mullen.
And I'm Jennifer Mullen.
The legal issues surrounding end of life can be extremely complicated. In this episode, we'll talk with someone who has absolutely learned that to be true. Our guest for this show is a woman who says she followed the directions given to her by her mother's hospice coordinators and then was later charged with murder. But first, Jennifer, how is your mom?
Gagi is doing really well. I am pleased to report.
Good to know.
We have been in the post-hospital stay. So this was the hospital stay from a few weeks ago with the TIA. So post-hospital stay, flurry of in-home healthcare. And I know I talked a little bit about it on the last episode, Mom's fantastic distraction techniques.
Oh, she's good at it.
With the physical therapist. She's actually good at it with like a lot of things, not just the physical therapist. But yeah, we're winding down, which I think will be frankly a relief for my brother and I, because it's been a lot of in-home appointments to manage, and not to mention the usual flurry of doctor's appointments. But really, she's doing well. I just got a call from the LPN who comes to visit, and she wants to come tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m.
Ouch.
And I texted my brother to let him know, and he said, ugh, Mom's gonna hate that, which she totally is. But with the in-home healthcare, I will say, for anybody out there who maybe has never dealt with it before, they have schedules that they're trying to piece together.
They're going from place to place to place to place to
every
place.
single day. Like, it has to be so exhausting, right? At the end of one day, they're looking at their patient roster for the next day, and they're trying to piece it together, and they're taking into account travel in between locations and their starting point and their ending point, and it's a lot. So we really try to be as flexible as possible with them. So yes, I know Mom is going to hate having the LPN there at 7:30 in the morning.
She doesn't sleep anyway.
Actually, like 7:30 a.m. is quality sleeping time for her, because she'll have been awake for a few hours, and that's first nap of the day.
The Today Show's on.
Exactly, at ear splitting level. So, but anyway, yeah, she's going to hate it, but also just try to really be mindful that those people working in that profession are juggling a lot of different things. So it is what it is.
It is what it is.
So Steve, how's your mom?
She's fine. Real quick story just from today, actually. I was over there, and despite it not being really, really warm, she wanted to get outside. So we got her shawl, wrapped it around her, went out into the courtyard, and there was a gentleman out there who has become a friend of hers. He's part of the friend group there that she has. And his name is Burl.
A friend or a friend?
Friend.
Okay.
Not a friend.
Just checking.
Just a friend.
Okay.
As far as I know.
Okay.
But his name is Burl. Now, Burl was sitting there. He was tinkering. And we wheeled on over to him. And she said, oh, you working on your car that you were talking about? And he had this little model car that had a solar panel on top of it. And he was trying to get it to go. Apparently, you could control it like a remote controlled car with his phone.
Interesting.
And so he was tinkering with that. And she said, oh, well, yeah, you talked about, didn't you make a radio from a kit? And he said, oh, yeah, that went pretty well. And I'm thinking, this guy is so cool.
Yeah.
This is what I want to be like when I'm, older like that, just tinkering around with stuff like that. And the next thing I thought was, geez, I wish he was my grandfather. And then I thought to myself, no, he would be my father. He
would be your dad.
Because,
yeah.
I still don't remember that I'm 55.
Right.
If he were my grandfather, he would almost certainly be dead.
Yeah.
Or at the very least be very old.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think that's a Gen X thing where we just don't realize how old we are at this point, and we probably never will.
We definitely don't. I was reading a memoir. when I was traveling for work last week, and I was reading one of my favorite memoirs from one of my favorite authors, Anna Quinlan. And at the start of each chapter, there's, a little phrase or something, at the beginning. And there was if you didn't know how old you actually are, how old would you think you are? And it did make me stop. And like immediately in my head, I was like, oh, 35. Like, I feel like I'm 35.
Right.
All the time. I feel like I'm 35 and I forget.
You mentioned that. And I said, you had just like a little bit before had said something about, oh, I drove on that road. Oh, geez, 10 years ago. And my first thought was, geez, when you were in college?
Yeah. Oh, it's very sweet. I love that you thought that, though.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Anyway, let's get to our episode. We have a very special guest for this episode. Several years ago, Rachel Waters was called from her home in New York by her mother's assisted living facility in Georgia because they believed her mother was in her last days. Rachel rushed to her side and was there when she passed. But then Rachel was later charged with murder.
Wow. I can't wait to dig into this episode. So Rachel joins us now to tell her story and to talk about what she's doing to ensure that her story is not repeated. Rachel Waters, welcome to Caregiving Gen X Style.
I'm so glad to be here, and thank you so much for having me on the show today. It's funny because I'm sitting here listening to you talk about your ages, and I am a zennial, right? I was born in 83, so I'm right on that cusp generation, 43 years old now, and I forget how old I am all the time.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It's funny how that happens, right?
It is. It's like, suddenly middle-aged.
Yeah, it's just a number though, right? That's what I think to myself all the time. It's just a number, and mind over matter.
But you know what? People talk about 50-year-olds as being middle-aged. Well, you are if you're planning to live to 100.
Yeah.
You're really not otherwise.
Okay. No, if I die when my mom did, I am past middle age.
Wow.
But
let's not think about it that way though, right?
That, right?
Right. Well, so Rachel, let's start. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So a little bit about me. I am originally from a little bitty town in Georgia known as Harlem, Georgia. It's just outside of Augusta, home of the Masters Golf Tournament. I was born and raised there. I grew up for the first 29 years of my life off a dirt road. And so I stayed there for a while until small town life, I could no longer tolerate it. I was working as a federal investigator at the time. I was doing background investigations. My degree was in journalism, but that was not paying really at the time I came out. So I applied those skills as an interviewer and a writer, as an investigator. But that gave me a lot of flexibility, enabled me to move to New York in 2012. And I have been here ever since. Had a lot of career iterations. I ended up going to graduate school at the news school, and I moved over to the nonprofit world, got back into writing, did a lot of nonprofit communications work. And that is what I was doing when my mom first began to get sick, which was in 2020 during the pandemic. She was the type of person where everyone in the family, if they were to place bets, would live to 100. It was her, right? She was a very health focused all her life. She was, super vibrant and active. She had been an electronics or satellite engineer with the U.S. government for 37 years.
Wow.
Before she retired, she was an artist. She was still painting and teaching painting classes. She was traveling to New York to visit me twice a year. I came down to Georgia to visit her twice a year, and we talked every day on the phone. So even though I had moved away at 29, my mom and I were extremely close. My parents divorced when I was 11. I was estranged from my father for many, many years. And so my mom was really who I had, along with my aunt and my surviving maternal family. And so it was quite a shock when, during the pandemic, I had gone from seeing this very normal, healthy, vibrant woman, in January of 2020, because I left after New Year's. My husband's and I left. And I had planned to see her for her birthday on March 18th, 2020, but we all remember what happened.
We all know what happened then.
Yeah, I would imagine that did not happen.
Yep.
I couldn't get down there. Of course, New York City locked down completely. And I noticed over the course of the summer, my mom's text messages were getting increasingly garbled and strange. And for a woman who used to teach English before she ever went into, working for the government, that was really odd. And I knew that we both shared the Alzheimer's gene. And so I was always a little bit watchful for that, for signs of it. But these became unignorable. I mean, it was just really out there, half sent text messages, just bizarre misspellings that she never would have made in the past. Mm-hmm. And I knew in my gut that she was probably already succumbing to cognitive decline. I had no idea what she looked like at this point. She lived in a very rural area, so FaceTime was not really a thing. She didn't have the service to do FaceTime.
Okay, I was gonna ask, were you not able to FaceTime her
Nope.
to
We
see
could
her?
talk.
Okay.
No, I couldn't see what she looked like. Now, on the phone, she sounded relatively normal, except she was reversing her pronouns quite a bit, which was also telling. All he's were she's, all she's were he's, and she could never get it straight.
Interesting.
And,
So that's a normal thing to happen with Alzheimer's?
it is not. My mom had a really unique variant that started with what we call primary progressive aphasia. Some people are familiar with it because that's how Bruce Willis presented.
Willis.
Right. I was going to say Bruce Willis. Yeah.
That's right. And it starts with language, which was why her writing ability and her reading ability began to slip early. And her language faculty began to slip earlier than her memory. And so I knew, seeing these text messages and hearing these weird flubs, I was pretty desperate to get down to Georgia and see how she was. So we rushed down in August after isolating, and we drove all the way down, testing all the way. And when we arrived, my mom looked like she had aged 20 years and 8 months.
Oh,
she
wow.
had lost about 20 pounds. Her entire spinal column had collapsed from osteoporosis. She was doubled in half, almost. And I jumped into action, got her with a gerontologist, got her cognitive assessment. She was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, but pretty advanced. The doctor agreed with me that she was on the road to Alzheimer's. And for someone like my mom, you notice cognitive decline early on because she was very high functioning. My family, unfortunately, was in denial, so there was not a lot of help there. They had a lot of suspicion about me coming down and wanting to jump into action. They thought I was going to try and seize her assets and things like that. My family has kind of long been suspicious of me. I've been the black sheep. I come from a very traditional evangelical, pretty hard right background, and I am none of those things. I am a Buddhist and quite liberal, and I have 2 husbands living in New York. So you can imagine the suspicion of me. And that was a big roadblock. And I knew then, especially as an only child and my mom being divorced, that for the most part, I would be on my own in getting her care. Her sister lived a few doors down and was very invested in looking after her, but we had very different ideas of what good care entailed. For instance, she was very afraid. My mom's sister was afraid of Alzheimer's medications. She read all the side effects and believed they would happen. She's a little bit QAnon. It has a lot of suspicion of any kind of drugs or medication. And I was unable to get my mom on any of those because the family basically said that they would not participate in her care if I did.
Just curiously, and maybe you were going to get to this, do you feel like the isolation of the pandemic contributed? 1,000%. Yeah.
1,000%.
Okay.
Yes. I do. My mom did not catch COVID, but my mom, it was twofold, that isolation. Her sister was, interestingly enough, QAnon though she was afraid of the pandemic. So she would just come by my mom's house and kind of wave to her and see her from the yard. So my mom had zero social interaction directly with anybody until I got there in August. So that's close to 6 months.
Yeah, that's a long time.
It's a long time from early March on. And that is no in-person doctor's visits. So when her spinal column fractured and began to collapse, she was unable to see a doctor. Then she didn't even really know to, and my aunt didn't see her, right? No one had eyes on her until I got there because my mom was so isolated living off this dirt road. And so I think the combination of the pain from the collapsed spine, which we later found was due probably to early multiple myeloma, making her bones unusually fragile. And so she progressed really quickly. I do believe that it really accelerated the dementia. It was sort of the perfect storm of inflammation, pain, and isolation that sort of came together. And we know now, right, that a huge risk factor for Alzheimer's progression is social isolation.
Absolutely.
Massive part of the risk. So it absolutely played a role, but it was a lot of factors. But, that sort of began my journey as a caregiver. And from there, my mom sort of rapidly went downhill. It was faster progressing than, we could have ever conceived. Even her doctor at the time said, even if she has MCI now, Alzheimer's is a very slow disease. You're looking at, you might be 5 to 10 years off before you even need to really consider in-home care. You have time, basically, was what I was told. I did not have time.
So you eventually, you did get her into a memory care unit and eventually also into hospice care.
Yes. So hospice came first. And this is sort of where things start to get, I think, a bit difficult or complicated, I should say, in my situation. And I'm not going to speculate as to motives here, but I think that there was again, it's sort of the perfect storm of things that sort of set us up to be probably in the worst position to be protected in the way families should be. And I will go ahead and say this, that even though my situation is unique to me, it is not uncommon for caregivers to find themselves in really unpredictable and bizarre situations as their loved one declines. And any number of those can land you into a very odd legal limbo. And I say this because I have been on these caregiver and dementia subreddits for a long time. And I've also had a lot of people reach out to me after what happened to me to talk about things that were sort of similar happening in their lives. So that's what I'm going to put a pin in, just so everybody remembers that as they hear my story and maybe think, oh, well, that would never happen to me. Maybe not that, but something with similar consequences just might.
Right. And when she was admitted into hospice care, you received this home care kit?
That's right. Because so my mom was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in addition to Alzheimer's in July of 2022. Okay. So that is exactly 1 year before she died. She was not eligible for any of the big guns of treatment because she already had advanced dementia and was very frail from osteoporosis. She had rapidly progressing Alzheimer's, and she already had a history. She was starting to have transient ischemic events, or TIAs, right? These mini strokes. But by December, her multiple myeloma had advanced significantly, and her oncologist said, I don't see your mom really making it much longer than 6 months. She said it could be as long as a year, but if I were to put money on it, I think we're looking at about 6 months, and I think now is probably an appropriate time to move her into hospice care. I had many friends. This is, at this point, I'm already working as a life sciences and medical copywriter. It was a field I moved into after my mom got sick because I needed something that required a bit less emotional labor than the nonprofit world, and was maybe on the horizon of new therapies, so I could have something hopeful to focus on. But a lot of my friends, I already had a lot of friends in the medical field. My husband, David, is an Alzheimer's researcher at NYU, so very close to this.
Well, that comes in handy, I would think.
Yes, certainly for me.
Yeah.
He redirected the whole course of his career after my mom got sick and my genetic test came up. But we moved her into home hospice. I had a lot of friends who were hospice nurses, which was the point of me mentioning that I have a lot of friends in the field. And everything I knew about hospice was, this is the way to go, especially for a parent that is in chronic terminal decline and is probably going to be very afraid and disoriented by hospital settings at end of life. And I wanted to keep mom at home as long as humanly possible and hire in-home caregivers to help with us too, because even though I lived in New York, I was down there like every 6 weeks for 2 weeks at a time. So I was there very frequently, and I was hiring in-home caregivers. And so when we put her into home hospice, they came by the house and they told us, hey, we're going to prescribe this comfort kit to you because that is standard practice for everyone who goes into hospice care. You go pick it up from CVS and we give you a hotline number to call. The instructions for use are on the medications themselves, but you can always call for further direction. And this is what you use if your loved one begins to experience pain or distress. at end of life and no one is available to help out, no hospice professionals available. It could be 5 a.m. And comfort kits, though they vary a little bit from company to company, they typically contain things like sublingual morphine, which is for the pain and breathlessness sometimes that people will experience toward end of life,
Sure.
as well as benzodiazepines, things like lorazepam to help calm anxiety. You get suppositories for constipation and a whole other variety of medications that sort of, again, varies from company to company.
And the instructions are like really pretty clear on all of these things?
Oh, well, they're clear in the way that prescription drug medications are, right? Where it says, give this amount this frequently for these symptoms.
Okay.
And, when hospice prescribes them, they're like, you can call for guidance on these, but you are left with the impression that there's no special extra thing you need to do. Despite the opioid crisis and the fact these are controlled substances, the assumption is, well, these are protected because their administration is protected because you're being given them by a healthcare professional, right? And you're being told to use them at home. And everybody I talked to who was a hospice nurse was like, yeah, this is standard practice. And it gave me a little anxiety to have those around the house. So we, stowed them in a hidden compartment in the back of like a drawer where we stayed at my mom's house, a place we knew my mom wouldn't ever access. And we didn't touch them. My mom, her pain was relatively managed before she went into memory care. So we didn't really have to pull that out. I think we did once when she was having a really bad night. And we had called in and used a little bit of the sublingual morphine because my mom already had, she had a Tylenol with codeine prescription and that was going to be overkill. And she had some pain from bone pain, used it, was no big deal, the correct dose, and didn't really think anything of it. Goes back in the drawer. Unfortunately, when March of 2023 rolled around, it became clear that my mom's home, even with round-the-clock care, was no longer safe for her. There's simply too many potential elevation variations in the home. We realized this is just no longer going to be a safe place for her.
So this is where assisted living comes in.
That's right. And so we spent a long time finding a facility that was very similar in appearance to her home and aesthetic, so it would feel comfortable. We wanted it to be close to where she lived so that her siblings, despite my disagreements with them, could still come and visit her, one of which my aunt came and visited her daily.
So in 2023, your mother's assisted living called you to say that she was near the end. You rushed down there. What happened then?
So she had only been there a couple of months. She was still on home hospice because assisted living is just that. It is not a medical facility. It is a place you pay rent as well as paying extra, right, for the caregiving services. But you retain.
Absolutely. We've talked all about that.
Yep.
That's
very
right.
familiar.
That's right. So you retain all your rights, your power of attorney and all of that. You don't surrender that. And my mom had her own private room and, I understood the legal designation. It was still her residence. And so she doesn't come off home hospice. The comfort kit, it stayed with us. I assumed one had been prescribed to the facility, but that wasn't really my business at the time, right? Because she didn't need it. So I didn't think anything of it. So when I got that call, which was in July, and that was on July 9th, I hear a cat.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Side note for our listeners out there, you certainly heard us talk about our cats who like to join every now and then. Yes.
Yes, he's just walking around talking for no reason.
Is carrying his little stuffed mouse around. Sorry about that interruption there, Rachel.
We're cat people over here, so no need to apologize. Yeah, so I got a call. And it was from both my mom's assisted living and the hospice nurse. My mom had been found on the morning of July 9th, doubled over, non-responsive with an oxygen saturation in the 70s. She was like that for several hours before hospice was able to get to her. Now, she had a DNR and an advance directive citing comfort care only, but they did put her on oxygen. And presumably they did that to try and keep her alive long enough for me to get down. Because when I got the call, the nurse got on the phone and he said, "You need to come down immediately. I think she may only have hours." She was
Wow.
already starting to turn blue,
Oh my.
and she was no longer responsive.
And were you just so I can have the visual, were you like hopping a flight to go down there, or were you getting in the car and driving down there?
Oh my God. We had a massive storm. We had 3 flights canceled that we had tried to buy that night. Every single flight in New York City was grounded. So the next morning, we got an Amtrak to Washington, D.C., and then caught a flight from Washington, D.C. to Augusta, Georgia.
Wow. Okay. So you had a planes, trains, and automobiles
We
experience
did.
just to get
And
down there.
it was a heart-pounding panic, talking to the hospice, please, is she still alive? And at this point, my friend who's a hospice nurse is coming down and keeping eyes on her too, because hospice couldn't be with her that often. I have family friends coming in to keep eyes on my mom, and I'm just praying I get there in time. When I arrived the night of the 10th, I arrived with my husband. My mom was not responsive, except, if you turned her, she would grimace in pain and she would kind of groan, but she couldn't really close her eyes. They were already beginning to dry out from a lack of fluids. She couldn't move her limbs. It looked like she had had a massive stroke of some kind. But her skin was already, very waxy and starting to turn yellow. Her toes were turning black. She had no food, no fluids, no urination, no defecation. And she was around 80 pounds at this point. So she was quite emaciated. This was a woman who was typically about 130 throughout her life. So it was really distressing to see her like that, but it was also very clear that she was actively dying. And my nurse friend agreed. And of course, that was the assessment when we got down. And so when we get there, I ask, "Do you guys have the comfort kit with morphine here?" Because, I can see that she's in a lot of pain when she's turned. The fact that she would not respond to any stimulus except when being turned, and she had this grimaced, agonized face, tells you how much pain she was in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She's not a woman that could recognize that I or anyone else was there or could communicate in any way. And they said, "No, we don't. We don't have any on order." And so hearing that, my husband, again, we're not thinking much of this. He's like, "Well, I can go get the one from the house, so we at least have something on hand while we wait for them to call this in." And so he goes to my mom's old house. He picks it up. We kept it in the car because we did know that facility rules, you can't have other patients potentially get someone else's medications. I'm Googling the laws in Georgia, just making sure that's under the designation. Like if you because it was against facility rules to have outside medications, but I was like, I don't think it's illegal though, because it's still her residence. And sure enough, under Georgia law, residents actually can keep and manage their own medications. There's nothing specifically for family members, but it is recognized as a home. So they still have the same rights. You just can't endanger other residents. So,
Right. Okay.
So I was like, all right, we can, we'll keep it in the car and let's just hope that they get a prescription here. Unfortunately, the nurse I was interacting with, she continued to decline the prescription as I'm asking. And this struck me as very odd. I got a wee bit upset and I cited my mom's right to pain relief under the Pain Relief Promotion Act of 2000. I was clearly very concerned about them not having that medication there, especially since my mom had end-stage multiple myeloma, which is a bone cancer, essentially. It's technically a blood cancer, but creates bone lesions that are incredibly painful.
So I was going to say very painful, obviously. Yeah.
And the standard of care for everyone in hospice is morphine at end of life if there is pain.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And so that was sort of the first sign that something was odd, because I didn't understand why they were declining to prescribe it to the facility. Regardless, we were prepared for her to pass it any day because we have our beds set up in her room and we are watching day by day. Again, no fluids. She is getting progressively drier, progressively fading. Her fingers are now starting to turn to, and she's to the point where her mouth, she's gone without fluids for so long. She has a cracked, bleeding tongue even, which was really distressing too. But again, told by hospice nurse friends, this is normal. It's what we expect. But they agreed. They're like, it was abnormal for her to not have morphine, but no one was sort of setting off the alarms yet because everyone believed surely it would come. Unfortunately, the night of July 12th, it was the middle of the night. My husband and I were sleeping on the floor. It was about 4:30 in the morning. I was awakened by the sound of teeth smashing together. Those were my mom's teeth. She was gasping for air, but she could only really use her jaw muscles. And it was really extreme and distressing to see. At this point, I am running out into the hall and saying, my mom, and I've Googled it too, I'm like, I think this is agonal breathing. Is this agonal breathing? Yes, Google agrees. I run into the hall and I'm like, where is please tell me that comfort kit prescription has come through the facility. Because at this point, I know that they are not going to like me bringing in that comfort kit, legal or not. I don't want complications. I want them to administer it.
Sure.
And so they're like, we don't have it. We don't have one. And so I go, oh my God, we're going to have to use the one we have. And so my husband, I let everyone at the facility know, maybe my mistake, hey, we do have her comfort kit from home. We're going to grab it and we're going to call hospice and see if at least we can use it, because they can't administer something not prescribed to them. That's legally,
right. Makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I knew that I was still within my rights because I'm not an employee. And so we grabbed the kit, we call the hospice hotline, and I said, look, we are here. These are my mom's symptoms. She is gasping for air. She is in clear discomfort. We have the comfort kit from home from when she went into hospice. Is there an issue if, even though she's at a memory care facility, if we administer it to her now? And the nurse on the line said, I don't see why not. That's what they're prescribed for. And I was like, well, what's the dose? And she told me the dose to give under the tongue. She said in agonal breathing, we use 1 milliliter under the tongue. I had her on speakerphone. My husband was right there. We draw up the 1 ml. So 1 ml is not a very high dose. It's about the equivalent of 20 milligrams.
Right.
Okay.
And it wouldn't kill you or me, even being opioid naive. It would be extremely unlikely. But I administered that sublingually, which already reduces absorption. But it didn't really make any difference. Within about 38 minutes, her breathing pattern never changed except to stop. And she died.
Okay.
And it was absolutely gutting because it was very clear that it was too little, too late, and that my mom had just died gasping for air for hours at that point.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I'm going to get on to my next question in just a moment, but I am just going to take a moment to say, Rachel, that I hope that you have allowed yourself a lot of grace as you think back on those moments, because in the end, you did the best you could in the circumstances that you were in, and it sounds like not receiving a whole lot of guidance or support. So
I appreciate that.
So, obviously for, a while after your mom's death, you went on with your life, grieving as any daughter would, right?
Yeah.
When did you actually find out that you were being accused of killing her?
2 hours after she died.
2 hours later. Okay. So
that's right.
What were your first thoughts when you felt like, who says this to you, and what are your thoughts when you find this out?
So we had called hospice and they came out. So we had no reason to believe there was anything awry. We called the very hospice we'd spoken to on the phone who authorized the dose. They came out, they declared her, they dressed her, they made preparations for her body to be taken by the funeral home, which we'd already made contact with, knowing that she was expected to die, and we just made them aware that we would probably be reaching out in a few days, so we could arrange a service and cremation, which was what my mom wanted. They came and prepared her. Family came by to say their goodbyes. And it was on the way home, waiting for the funeral home, because they were a little delayed that morning. So they were going to pick up her body a bit later, and we were exhausted. And so we were heading back to my mom's house where we were staying otherwise. And the funeral home calls while we are on the drive back and says, there's a problem. We can't pick up your mom's body because her body has been taken to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation crime lab.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
And I knew, former investigator too, I also didn't
exactly. You know what's going on there.
I knew the only reason for that was that someone had accused me of murder.
Oh my gosh.
And my first thought, first of all, it's terror, right? Blood run cold terror, because it's the last thing that you ever expect, especially after you've been called down because your mom's dying. But the second thing was, oh my God, someone must have thought that someone must have misunderstood where I got the morphine from. And surely this is going to be cleared up, very soon. Like I was like, I told everybody on the up and up, maybe it was, I heard it through the grapevine era. And the other thought I had was maybe they had mistook their facility rule for the law. Right. So maybe they thought that because their facility didn't want you to bring in outside medications, that it was in fact illegal, when it's not. It's just a facility rule for liability. So that was my first thought. And it was followed by, even though I'm terrified, I'm pretty sure that as soon as they see the records that I was called down and they see her, hospice is going to have all this, I assumed that I was protected. Right.
Right. You would think.
So you sort of hold this in the back of your mind, no matter how scared you are, of like, okay, if I do everything right and, follow my rights and prepare, it will eventually be okay. So I went ahead and called an attorney to consult with him and said, what do I expect? I've never had adverse contact with law enforcement. I'm 40 years old at that point. And so I certainly knew my rights, but I didn't know what was going to happen. And he said, look, you need to prepare. Investigators are going to show up and you tell me the story and I can convey it to them. It's safer that way. And I'll talk you through it. And sure enough, after we arrived back, investigators did show up. There were 2 plainclothes officers and 5 sheriff's cars or deputies that showed up in the yard, which was very scary. They wanted me to hand over my cell phone originally and speak to me. And I said, you can get a warrant for the phone and you can talk to my attorney.
Good call.
And they said, you know how this looks, don't you? And I said, yes, it looks like I know my rights.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And they went ahead and got the warrant. It took about 2.5 hours. But when they came back, I assumed my lawyer did tell them the story because they came back asking for the morphine. And at that point, I'm relieved. I'm like, oh, thank God, they're going to see it's a valid prescription. They're going to see it's barely used. This is a good thing in my mind.
Right.
And so they take it. And after that, I'm left with no phone. I'm still planning the funeral, but it's dead silent. My family at this point, within the next week or 2, they stopped talking to me completely. I didn't know exactly why. There had been some tension before my mom passed. But, it's little things that start changing that in hindsight, I now realize what was going on. But, police didn't speak to my husband, who was in the room, who had picked up the comfort kit from the house. And it was completely silent for 18 months.
Oh my goodness.
God, I can't imagine. So Rachel, just a little side note. I don't know if Steve told you this when he was setting up the interview. So I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and I watch a lot of true crime documentaries. So I'm just like, I also have that lens as I'm listening to all of this. First of all, good for you for knowing your rights. That drives me insane all the time when I listen to these true crime stories, right? Like that 100% is your right to say like, I need to have an attorney for representation and I'm not handing over my phone without a warrant.
That's right.
And it's insane that, of course, and I get it. It's kind of a, for lack of a better term, good cop, bad cop. I mean, they're saying to you, like, do you know that this looks like you're guilty, which is crazy. It's insane. And then to just think that you are plunged into this silence for that length of time, I can't even imagine. By the way, while you were grieving the loss of your mom, like I can't even imagine how
and the loss
horrifying.
of my family, which swiftly followed.
Right.
There's no life insurance if you don't have a death certificate with cause of death. There's no closure because, mind you, I had a lot of questions about how my mom was found. Why was she doubled over? Who found her? Because when I arrived, I was trying to get records from the facility and hospice, and they weren't handing them over to me, which was also very weird.
Yeah, and to your point, assisted living, totally get it. It is not a medical facility in that, like in the truest sense of the word. But to your point, like to arrive and find your mom in that condition, I mean, that just feels like flat out neglect, frankly.
I cannot speak to that, but we certainly had a lot of concerns.
Yeah.
And so did, witnesses who came and saw my mom. And I will say that those concerns resulted in a somewhat adversarial relationship.
Sure.
Toward the end of my mom's life.
Sure.
And we were in the process of, trying to move her, and we realized she was just much too fragile and declining too rapidly. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I had a lot of questions, right? So I was also eager to get that cause of death because I'm looking for clarification too. I want an autopsy report. But in the interim, about a year before my indictment, so in February of 2024, I managed to get those records finally because I got an attorney to send a demand letter to the facility. And the facility not only sent my mom's records from them, but they sent her medical records from the hospice company. And this was the first sign that something terrible might be coming for me, because when I read through those records, I saw that the day I had argued with the nurse about my mom's right to pain relief and morphine, she had charted that I requested euthanasia instead of requesting morphine.
Oh my goodness.
No.
And obviously you didn't.
And I did not.
Oh.
I had in fact recorded that conversation.
You say that again?
Because I had in fact recorded that conversation.
Okay. That's interesting. I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask if at any point any of this was recorded. I was starting to have
concerns about medical malpractice from the denial of morphine.
Okay.
Wow. And I knew the state's recording laws too. And I told her that I was going to record. And it was clear that was the conversation she referenced, because it was the one conversation we had that day. And that was all she put. And she even put it in quotes that I had, said it directly. And in the conversation, you hear me saying, can we please ask about that morphine again? Is that possible for us? But instead she says, I asked, is euthanasia possible?
Right. So basically it was almost like her interpretation of,
right.
of what you were asking for.
Yeah, it sounds like she thought you were asking for an overdose of morphine in order to end her life, but that's not what you asked for.
You were asking for morphine for pain management.
And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And that was deeply alarming to me. And all I could think was, my God, if this is what she told police, what is going on with my mom's cause of death and death certificate? And again, though, you're thinking at this time, she got one small dose. It's still not going to be, I had already been talking to medical examiners too, by the way, in other states, asking them, have you ever seen a case like this? And they're like, no, we see it with IV morphine. They're like, one dose of sublingual morphine, you're going to have blood levels are going to be borderline at best. If she has no food or fluids, you might get higher than expected blood measurements, right? Because she's not urinating, she's not drinking, she's not processing medications. But they're like, no medical examiner, is reasonably going to find that to be a contributor. Well, that's why my case is unique, because my mom's report did come back. It took them a long time, but I learned in February of 2025, just before my 42nd birthday, through an Instagram comment, that I had been indicted on 2 counts of murder in the state of Georgia, felony murder and malice murder, and that there was an active warrant for my arrest. someone tipped me off through a malicious Instagram comment on a post I'd made memorializing my mom ahead of my birthday.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
And
So you're back home at this point.
I am.
You're back home.
I've been back home, right?
Yeah.
And I've traveled out of the country while I've been a suspect. I've, trying to live my life and move through my grief as best as possible. But I see this just ahead of my 42nd birthday, and I send a screenshot of it to the attorney who counseled me. Because at this point, my husbands are like, this has got to be like a scam. Someone's trying to blackmail you. This is ridiculous. There's no way you would find out this way. This can't be real. It's been almost 2 years. And one thing lawyers tell you is like the longer you go without being charged, the less likely you are to be charged because, they had toxicology back on my mom, I think just 6 months after her death. But they were waiting to finalize everything. And so you're thinking, if these people think I'm a murderer, wouldn't they be eager to come and get me?
Well, and even 6 months sounds ridiculous for toxicology.
Right? GBI was backed up. But anyway, I send the screenshot to my attorney and I said, is this real? Am I about to be arrested? And he just writes back, yes.
Wow.
And so you were told that you had to come down to Georgia and surrender.
Well, man, actually, that kicked off a whirlwind. To give you the abridged version. He gets on the phone with me. This is a Friday night, getting around 11 p.m. at night. He's on vacation with his family. He's having a few drinks in the hot tub.
This is your lawyer.
And this is my pro bono attorney that had advised me from the beginning and had stayed in touch with me and talked me off the ledge whenever I would have panic attacks because I wasn't getting answers about my mom, or I, found him at that record that said I'd requested euthanasia. So he sort of counseled me off and on throughout this. And I get on the phone with him and he's, a couple of sheets to the wind in this hot tub. And he says, Rachel, he said, listen, this is sort of this. If I were you, I would get the one person in Georgia. The only person I would get to defend me would be Brian Steele. And I'm like, the young thug attorney? He's famous. That man's not going to take my case. And he said, he will. I have him on the phone.
Jennifer knows who this is, apparently.
What?
And all of my despair and terror, there's suddenly like this glimmer of hope, like, oh my God, this amazing criminal defense attorney who I know if I can get him my evidence will almost certainly be able to save my life. Because, man, if you know anything about criminal prosecutions in this country, like when a serious felony charge is brought against you, is 90% of the time the state wins.
Right. They don't bring it unless they think they can win.
That's exactly right.
That's right. And so Brian Steele, I get on the phone with him and his wife while they're driving down the road in Atlanta. And he says, your case is just insane. I have heard the story. I would be proud to stand with you. And what we're going to do is we're going to make arrangements for you to turn yourself in, and we're going to make bond. And then we're going to fight this.
And bond was $200,000.
It sure was. 2 weeks later, I was driven down because you can't fly. You're a fugitive and you lay low from the cops because there's a warrant out for you and everyone's presumably looking for you and you don't want to get stuck at Rikers. So I was a fugitive.
You got bounty hunters looking for you and everything.
You definitely don't want to get stuck at Rikers.
In my own home. News articles are coming out about me saying I injected my mom with morphine, saying I stole it. And at that point, something's clearly fishy about the reports they're getting because I'm like, stole it? She had a prescription, injected. Right. What? She had a needle. Now, she did have an injection where she was hospitalized 5 days prior to her death. But I'm like, do they not have these records? But I'm starting to wonder. I'm like, I don't think you're starting to get the impression reading these reports from what's been said to media that they don't even begin to have a complete picture. And so I'm already starting to gather my abundant evidence, to get to my attorney, just in case, God forbid, I don't make bond, because it's really hard to build a case if you're in jail. It's nigh impossible. Mm-hmm. And this judge is notoriously harsh in a very conservative county. Is not really known to grant bond to anyone charged with murder. But even so, we knew that I had a lot of community support, both here and in Georgia. I've been a writer for the last 20 years. People followed me online. I was a model. I used to run goth nights and clubs locally. So I know a lot of people. I have a big network of friends. And Brian was like, we need to have these people come and stand for you in court and speak to your ties to the community, because they're really valuable assets to show that you're not a threat. You're not going to run and try and disappear. You know, you're very deeply linked. And that's one of the most important parts of making bond. And amazingly, I had friends who were like, tell me where I need to be in that courthouse and I will be there. And I will put my reputation, my money, everything on the line, because we watched you through your journey with your mom. They were involved. They knew when I came down, you know, people were very close to this as I documented my mom's decline. And so they felt really strongly about coming out to support me. And thanks to that, even though I was jailed for 12 hours, it was only 12 hours because I had so many people come and stand for me in that courtroom and speak for me. But it wasn't just that. It was also the DA. So it turns out there was no sitting DA when I was indicted. It was the lead investigator who presented my case to a grand jury. And there was no DA because the original DA, before my indictment, was called into service in D.C. after Trump was elected.
Okay, I was going to ask, like, how was there no sitting DA?
There was no sitting DA. There was a big gap. And the new DA, DA Natalie Payne, did not come in until after my indictment. And so she gets, because in the state of Georgia, you don't need a district attorney to clear your case. Like it can be up to the discretion of the investigator to present your case and to decide to make the arrest. Mm-hmm. And it was that investigator that had made contact with me and said, you know how this looks?
Yeah, right.
And that was the one.
I'm sure you weren't feeling super confident at that point. Yeah.
Well, Natalie gets my case, and it was clear to me in the bond hearing, first of all, it was clear that she had some concerns, I should say, early in, because she starts doing her own digging after my indictment and starts trying to pull some records, because I feel like she felt that they did not have nearly enough evidence, it seemed. And I'm saying this in, you know, as opinion, and because I do not know for a fact, but that's what it appeared. And that's combined with the fact that when I had my bond hearing, she starts to walk back some of the charges verbally. She's like, I don't think any of this was done in malice or for financial gain. And she's sort of stutters a bit. And if you've seen the news footage, you would see this. She seems to be telegraphing doubts about the case. Regardless, she's stuck with it now, right? And I'm stuck with it. But she approached the bench during my bond hearing. She stops, you know, my attorney from proffering witnesses to testify that I am not a threat to my community and I won't flee. And she's like, we don't need to do this. I'm not going to fight bond. And that is almost unheard of for a DA, especially in a murder case. She's like, well,
in a murder case where with somebody who does not live in that area, and I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
Who's highly mobile, you know. She is, and I see her talking at length to the judge. The only thing I can tell is she's like, don't deny bond. But I can tell she really doesn't want me to be kept in jail.
Right.
Which, you know, this is an interesting observation. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, clearly I'm going to make it. And sure enough, declares bond, $200,000, which was already astronomical. I've already spent my life savings on legal fees. There's the rest, you know, in the non-refundable. We didn't have $200,000 up front at that point. So it's the $30,000 to the bondsman that you never get back.
Right. I was just going to say that.
I am fortunately released, and I had to give up my Fourth Amendment rights and my passport, and both my husbands had to give up their passports too. At that point, though, that is when all that hope starts to surge, because you know that you have a ton of evidence that now you can access and get to your attorney. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we were lucky that the DA is very generous with when she released discovery. By law, you don't have to release discovery until right before a trial. But she went ahead and released it early on, and looking through it was just staggering to me. I was like, the stuff they used as evidence that I committed murder was so easily explainable by maybe just pulling the rest of my phone records. They'd clearly use some kind of software where they only search for terms like murder or kill or things like that. but they didn't actually look at any of the contextual records. So what they found was me Googling murder charges after I'd been tipped off and told that I might be accused of murder.
So I have to say this, and I don't want to make light of anything.
Right, we're not going to make light of this.
But if someone searched through Jennifer's phone for murder and kill, they would find so much, just because she is a true crime enthusiast.
I'm a true crime expert.
Enthusiast.
Steven.
They would find so much that it would concern them a great deal.
Right. If they were paying attention to any of my streaming services.
Our Netflix suggestions are nothing but murdery stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, Rachel, I can't even imagine.
But it was wild to me. I'm like, that's evidence. The Google was well after my mom died. Like, yeah, I'm planning a murder, so I Google it after.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Because someone tipped me off, And then I'm also looking through the alleged medical records that they got, and it turns out they don't seem to have any of the records that I was called down or that my mom was declared actively dying.
Conveniently.
They only had a medication list from the facility.
Oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like a lot of this probably has to do, and I know assisted living facilities. My mother's been in 2 of them. Mm-hmm. It probably has a lot to do with the fact that she was in assisted living and not in a nursing home or a hospital that are actually medical facilities.
Yeah, in a weird way, right? In a weird way, that obviously was really working against you. Not that you would know that. Not, you right? It's hindsight to say that, but
I mean, I'm picturing something like this going on at my mother's assisted living. I mean, you're dealing with med techs and CNAs, and there's one RN, sometimes an LPN that's in charge of all that, and it's not a medical facility. They don't keep records like that.
But sometimes people, again, so it seemed to be that people were very alarmed that I had this morphine kit, and only one person, I can't get into a lot of details here because I'm still exploring legal avenues. Mm-hmm. There was really only one person who implicated me in this idea that I wanted to kill my mom by requesting euthanasia. So that's all we had there. And then we had the autopsy report. And I was utterly shocked that the medical examiner had concluded morphine toxicity because it took a very long time. And in his initial report, he tells the investigator, well, we expect high morphine levels in hospice patients. And the investigator says something along the lines of like, well, you know what we're looking for. We don't know what that means.
Right.
But we do know that after he originally states, it's not likely. Morphine can be kind of unpredictable, especially in someone who's dying. And mind you, her autopsy report showed full kidney failure, liver necrosis, which is liver death, bilateral pneumonia, brainstem atrophy, bone
There's
lesions.
A lot of things there that can end a life.
Well, she has multi-organ failure, according to the autopsy. But for some reason, he found this 420, I think, nanograms per deciliter of morphine to be the cause of death. Now, typically in an overdose, you see 1,000 to 4,000 nanograms per deciliter.
I would think it would be a whole lot more than that, yeah.
It is the lowest dose when I spoke to medical examiners after that anyone had ever heard of, but it's, being assigned, that they were aware of being assigned as a potential cause. We were also very confused because we thought, well, surely the levels would be much higher. But because she had only gotten that one dose, but had, it was sort of at the peak concentration and it was not being broken down by her liver or kidneys because those were not working. So effectively, it was the highest concentration you could get, especially with postmortem redistribution, because her blood was sampled, I think, 6 days after her death. And so postmortem redistribution is very significant at that point. So we see this and we realized, wait a minute, what if we are able to provide, because the medical examiner doesn't seem to know that my mom had no food or fluids. The medical examiner doesn't seem to know that she was oxygen deprived and that I was called down because she was actively dying. Because it appeared to us that the impression given was that I showed up and my mom died. And that was when we realized, if we can get him all the records we have, as well as all the video I have of my mom, because I started recording her as an argument for hospice to get that morphine prescription. And also, I had recorded that conversation with the nurse. What if I got all that evidence to him? I wonder if that would impact his determination of the cause of death, because medical examiners rely on context before death, not just how a body looks. And my attorney, Brian, was like, it's worth a shot. We can get this over to him. We also looked at studies showing the variations in post-mortem morphine redistribution. And we spoke to several experts about it and got their input. And experts sort of agreed across the board, yeah, this is going to be a really unpredictable post-mortem morphine redistribution. And what we see with kidney and liver failure with a 1 milliliter dose, that's right within the range we would expect if you gave the dose you said you gave. And so we got that report written up too and showed all the citations for it and encouraged medical examiner to double check those, sent him all of the medical records. And sure enough, in early August, several months after receiving and reviewing those medical records, he revised her cause of death.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting, and I read a number of articles about this, and I found it very interesting that they said morphine toxicity, and then later came back and said, yeah, maybe not.
Uh-huh.
What do you think happened?
I think, and I have to say this carefully, I
Sure.
think he, with the records we gave and with all the information we gave, he had material facts that were not available to him the first time around.
Oh, well, I am, again, I'm going to go back to my true crime expertness.
Enthusiast.
Steve. No, but I do think, I've certainly listened to, read about, watched cases where the medical examiner sometimes can come back and, change their findings. And it's for exactly that reason, right? They had a certain, set quantity of evidence that was provided to them, and then that expands. And then when they take those other things into account, even though I understand when you're looking at a body, it's a science, it's a medical thing, but then when you've got some additional context to that, absolutely it can potentially change how you ultimately, determine the cause of death.
Medically, we know that morphine is processed very differently in a person who's had no food, fluids, urination, or defecation.
Right.
He did not have that context as far as we're aware.
Yep.
Okay. It actually does change the calculation scientifically. And I say this as someone married to a scientist who's also a science, was a science writer too. So that's very relevant, right, for a medical examiner. And the other thing that he received that he didn't have is he got the records that we assume he didn't have. Was he saw that the IV line was not from me, but from hospitalization, because we got those hospitalization records that he didn't appear to have. He also got the photographs and proof of my morphine prescription, which we are actually not sure he was aware of a morphine prescription or not.
Oh my goodness. So here's what and I can't help but go here. And I know, like you said, you are perhaps pursuing some legal action. So you
legal avenue.
you may not be able to answer this question, but here's what I'm picturing in my head from having been around 2 different assisted livings, multiple times a week for, hours at a time. CNAs and med techs are gossips. They talk way too much. It feels like what happened was the police got to one CNA who thought they knew the story and told them all this stuff that led them down a path that they shouldn't have gone down. And I know you can't say much, but what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that our investigation is ongoing.
Okay. Understood.
Yep. Understood.
So you have started a push. We're going to move on from that. I know you can't say much, but you've started a push to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. Tell us about that.
I have. Well, it seems to me that one of the fundamental reasons I ended up in this position was this fear, this impression that the morphine was unauthorized.
Right.
And that kept showing up both in the medical examiner's report as well as police reports and in articles. And I realized going through all of the records from hospice, there was never any documentation of, me being authorized to use this comfort care kit. That was all verbal, right? It was a prescription sent into CVS, but it is a verbal, informal process. I realized, speaking to attorneys who did not have experience with hospice, they also assumed, well, of course it's illegal to squirt morphine in someone else's mouth. Right. And I was like, no, this is done in hospice all the time. And they were in disbelief when I told them about that. They had to speak to hospice professionals to be like, wait, lay people who aren't healthcare professionals are given morphine and told to give it to their loved ones? How is that legal? Mm-hmm. Turns out it's not explicitly legal anywhere. It is a gray zone. Healthcare professionals are protected against claims like this, right? Because they can administer medications to people who are sick and dying. Now, when my mom was prescribed that comfort kit, it's in her name, right? That's her medications. But there's actually no legal protection for the caregiver to administer those medications.
That's an interesting distinction.
A person is protected to self-administer their own medications, but as we know, dying patients cannot give themselves medication.
Right. Like that's
your mother was in no condition to give herself a medication.
Yeah, your mom was not in a state where she could have made that choice.
Why people who are given comfort care kits, they are effectively deputized, but it's all silent. It's all invisible to the system. Mm-hmm. And that law doesn't exist simply because it takes a precedent for laws to exist, as we know.
Well, and you're hoping to be that precedent.
I think you're, yeah.
And so what I am proposing is Marcia's Law, and it is very simple and very straightforward. The best laws are narrowly written. And the last thing we want to do is make families feel policed when it comes to administering comfort medications to their loved ones at end of life. And so after many conversations with hospice professionals, what we landed on was a standardized procedure of paperwork that would effectively create a paper trail that would have to be shared with law enforcement as well as with caregivers and with hospice companies saying, we have prescribed this comfort kit to the family. It contains these medications. These are the known caregivers of this person, whether those are family caregivers or hired caregivers, who may administer these medications. We have trained them and we have deputized them, effectively authorizing their use. And that is signed and dated by hospice, noting that these prescriptions are good for the duration of this person's time on hospice. Basically, we're authorizing this use, and it's a healthcare professional signing off on it and authorizing them to use it in accordance with their training.
It's almost like the next level of, so I think about it, because, my brother and I with my mom, or, Steve with his mom, right? We are authorized on all sorts of things for her. Mm-hmm. We can discuss medical decisions with her physicians because it is written down on paper that we're the people that can have these conversations. So it's almost like just this next level of that, really, which is like a natural progression to take this.
And it's shocking that it doesn't exist already.
It is shocking.
And it's not even covered under medical power of attorney, which I thought it would be because I had
you would think it would be.
I could make her decisions, but not medication administration. There is nothing that covers that.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Like, I mean, I get it too, right? Like, I'm not going to, we don't discount medical professionals and people who've gone to school for years to administer medications. Totally understand that. But this is definitely, it's kind of a niche thing. I mean, Rachel, you're just an example of this really unique, unusual situation to be in. And I'm so sorry that you've had to go through all of this. And I can't even begin to imagine how it's, affected your just the normal human processing of emotions, of grieving for your mom.
Yeah.
And then having all of this on top of it is just It's nothing short of unbelievable, really. But I applaud what you're doing to continue to fight for this and to recognize that it's frankly a simple change, but a super critical change that needs to be made in all of this.
It is. I mean, you have to consider the fact that 1.7 million Americans will go onto hospice every year, and the vast majority of those are in home hospice care with family caregivers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this may well have happened to somebody else before me, but if those people took a plea deal out of terror, they would not be speaking about it as I am. So while I am the first person we know so far in history to be charged with murder for a person who had been declared actively dying, there have been hospice murder allegations before, but not after a medical professional declared them to already be dying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't know, though, how many other families have had a loved one die in hospice care, and then someone, whether it's a family member or a healthcare professional, accuses them of overdosing them with morphine, and that's resulted in an investigation and charges. Because most people, if they're facing the possibility of the death penalty, they will take a plea deal.
Sure.
Especially if they can't afford an attorney, or if they weren't like me and collected buku of evidence because something felt off. Because it's very hard to prove innocence when, you have morphine and you gave morphine because it was at end of life. Like, you can only imagine how many people would get offered plea deals and would take it just out of sheer terror.
Yeah. Well, it's this. So it's twofold in my head as I'm digesting all of this. It's like you had the perfect storm of some, some familial things that were going on and distrust and that, and you've got a nurse who sort of maybe possibly incorrectly wrote something down incorrectly. I'm going to say that because I know you're in the middle of ongoing stuff, but then also you specifically, Rachel, the person that you are and the background that you had coming into this is kind of the perfect storm, hopefully ultimately only in the best way. I know you've had to go through all of this just unbelievable stress and trauma, but thank goodness for someone like you who also knew to ask a gazillion questions and knew to have enough sound mind to think, oh, maybe I should record this conversation, right? Because the average person might not necessarily think that.
No.
So you have all these other things, I think, also on your side to help make all of this hopefully come together to make Marsha's Law a reality.
I hope so, too. And that is why I'm doing this. I think some people have asked, like, oh, your life was just blown apart. You lost your career. You've lost your reputation among those who don't really know you well, right? So anyone who Googles me is going to be like, whoa. You're in a position of having to prove your innocence for the rest of your life. You've lost your family and you lost that ability. I lost that ability to grieve my mom in due time because I was so busy fighting for my life. And that really impairs your ability in the, of the hierarchy of needs. If your life is being actively threatened when your loved one's already died, you're not really able to focus on that grief.
Yeah.
And where can people go to learn about Marsha's Law?
So people can go to marshaslaw.org to learn more about Marsha's Law and how they can support it. I am currently fundraising now for my trips to state legislatures because that's part of the problem with losing your income. But I am also running a change.org petition, and they can learn all about the law and who it's designed to protect, as well as the story behind it at marshaslaw.org.
Rachel Waters, thank you so much for coming on our show to tell your story. We really appreciate it. It's obviously it's unique for our show, and it's unique in this world.
Yeah. And, this is the good part of the story where hopefully we can protect other people who won't have the same privileges I had to protect myself. And that's my greatest hope for this.
And I'm glad you're trying to at least fix the problem.
Yep,
That's a good
thing. We're on your side for sure.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you guys reaching out to me. And I'm excited to see the episode when it comes out.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode. If you want to get in touch with us, our email is caregivinggenxstyle@gmail.com. You can send us a text or a voicemail, 804-723-1221. We're on Twitter @GenXCaregiving. We're also on Facebook. That's where we post the most. Go to the show notes, click on the link. Please go like it and just connect with us. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.
Good night, everyone.